thank you very much. My family have, when I go back to South Australia, they tell me just to come back to Victoria now because I'm always talking about how good Victoria is. I'm really pleased to be here tonight, but I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who are here today, and also especially to Uncle Andrew, the gardener, for your welcome to country. I'd also like to acknowledge Sheikh Allah Ez Bukum and other imams and community leaders here tonight, and acknowledge our hosts, other ministers and members of parliament, and Ahmed Kezin, and all the Australian Intercultural Society for bringing us together and for your valuable work in providing platforms for cultural exchanges. I welcome leaders here from the not-for-profit and community sector, from business, sport, banking, the public sector, universities, from international consulates and all other parts of our diverse community. And finally, and most importantly, to the members of the Muslim community who've invited us to share in their Iftar or breaking with the fast. I say, Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. The month of Ramadan is a time of reflection and renewal. After a year of challenge and change, including coronavirus, as everyone has referenced, impacting last year's Iftar dinners around the country, as well as many other activities, including faith-based gatherings, we can all take this opportunity now to reflect. As I reflect on my own journey, I could never have imagined that it would bring me here to speak to you tonight. I arrived in Australia the day after my 11th birthday on an assisted passage. I was a 10-pound pom. We settled in Adelaide, where my family didn't know a soul in the northern suburbs. I had some troubled teenage years. I experienced assault and moved out of home at a young age. I worked evenings part-time in a cafe to put myself through year 11 and 12. It was difficult, but education's always been important to me. And so too, Islam values education, placing an obligation on all Muslims to seek knowledge regardless of gender. And this really resonates with my own values. Although I married at the right age of 18, I knew I wanted to go on to further study. I started at university when I was aged 26, and I had 4 little children aged between 0 and 6 while working part-time in our family business. I graduated a few years later with first-class honours in psychology, a university medal and Australian Psychological Prize for my thesis. I later completed a doctoral PhD research into adult consciousness development and leadership, and I received another university medal for that whilst also working as a full-time CEO. Human rights and equal opportunity has been at the heart of my career journey. I've dedicated my working life to breaking down gender barriers, and I've worked in a system where these same inequalities have been too long a reality. As the inaugural Victorian Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner, I'm responsible for administering the Gender Equality Act, which came into effect just a few weeks ago on the 31st of March. In decades to come, I think that we'll see this as a really important moment in a timeline towards gender equality in Victoria. And we're at a critical juncture for that in Australia. As issues of sexual harassment, assault and a culture of disrespect continue to unfold in our national headlines, we're seeing a sense of urgency for women and men to come together across Australia to demand that we all do better. It's clear to me that there's a real appetite for change, and current efforts to eliminate gender inequality in workplaces will receive a significant boost through the Gender Equality Act. It's a first for Australia. It requires public sector organisations, including all local councils, 79 local councils, and all of the 9 universities in Victoria, some of the organisations are in the audience tonight, to take positive action to achieve workplace gender equality. This includes undertaking an audit to assess the state and nature of gender inequality across 7 key indicators, in their organisation, and then working with their workforce to work out the strategies to deal with that, and putting those strategies into a gender equality action plan, which must be submitted to me by the 31st of October this year, along with all of their data, and will be published, made public on their own websites and on the website of my commission. Organisations also have to do a gender impact assessment on every program, service or policy that has a significant and direct impact on the public. So from the 31st of March, each organisation under the Act must undertake gender impact assessments for anything that has a public impact in their work, or anything that comes up for review in their work that has a public impact. If they don't comply, I also have powers to enforce compliance, and this is one of the first acts in the equality arena that has some teeth. I hope I never have to use them, but it's great to have them there just in case. So despite coming to Australia as a migrant, I wasn't in a minority, and nor did I face barriers because of my cultural or religious identity, but I did because of my gender. As Victoria's inaugural Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner, I want to be a really important part of changing that. My vision, and I think this is a vision that many of us share, is for a fair society where every Victorian is equally valued, regardless of their gender or their religious or cultural background. And yet, gender inequality persists in Victoria. We're definitely ahead of the game here, but we've got a long way to go to be equal. We can see this in our gender pay gap, in the concentration of women into lower paid roles and jobs, in the lack of workplace flexibility, and in the rates of sexual harassment in the workplace. We can also see it in the lack of women in leadership roles. While women make up more than half of our population, and they make up 68% of the public sector workforce, they're underrepresented proportionally in leadership roles, and as I said, concentrated in lower paying roles and industries. It's also concerning when we consider the underrepresentation of culturally diverse women in leadership positions. Where are the female Muslim leaders in government and the public sector? And indeed, where are the men? As many of you in this room tonight will, I know only too well, gender inequality is just one example of discrimination or disadvantage that a person might face. Culture, language and religious background can compound a person's experience of gender inequality or discrimination. Understanding the intersections of diverse experiences in gender inequality is critical to achieving meaningful change and progress. Right now, there's a lack of data on the key challenges that culturally diverse women face in the workplace, but the Gender Equality Act will make this visible. While intersectionality is essential to understanding the lived experience of diverse women, it's rarely explicitly considered in a legal framework. The Gender Equality Act is the first formal integration of intersectionality into Australian equality law, and that's why it's groundbreaking. It requires organisations to base their workplace gender audit on gender disaggregated data, and where possible, include data about Aboriginality, age, disability, ethnicity, gender, identity, race, religion and sexual orientation. And this will mean that equality is not just considered between two binary categories, but is formally recognised as multifaceted, multidimensional and complex. It's exciting to consider what this will mean as organisations embed diversity and inclusion into their workplaces. And I'm so glad that intersectional gender equality is much more a common part of the conversation now. Unfortunately, a woman who wears a hijab to the workplace will have a different experience than a woman with Anglo-Celtic, Celtic heritage like me. This seems obvious, but we need to consider how that might affect her career progression, or how, by capturing workforce data, we can help address the barriers for women from diverse backgrounds. Because it's not the women who need to change, but the organisations, the structures and the systems. It's clear when we look around and see the talented female leaders we have in Victoria that it's not a lack of ability that holds women back. There are countless examples of successful Muslim women leading the way in all areas of life. To name just one example, Azmina Hussain was recently awarded an Order of Australia for her services to the law and the community for advancing equality, social inclusion and justice. Azmina is the first Muslim woman to be the principal at Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, and many of you will know, I'm sure, Azmina from her leadership roles, including as chair and director of the Islamic Museum of Australia, a director of Football Victoria, and other government and advisory roles. As a young woman, Azmina is an inspiring role model for the next generation who, through her, can see what is possible for them too. And it's clear there's no shortage of inspiring Muslim women leaders, but why aren't we seeing them in our public sector, or more of them in our public sector workplaces? As Catherine Fox, author of the book Stop Fixing Women, says, no amount of leaning in, training or mentorship will break down the old boys network or fix the gender pay gap. We must recognise and address the fact that our workplaces were designed by men for men, men who didn't have to think about caring responsibilities and household responsibilities inside the home. And we must recognise and address the conscious and unconscious biases and restrictive gender, racial, religious and other stereotyping that negatively impacts women's opportunities for equal participation, equal pay, and also, unfortunately, leads to sexual harassment. All this remains a challenge to making our public sector leaders better resemble the richly diverse Victorian community that it serves. So the Gender Equality Act has now come into effect. It's clear this beautiful state of Victoria places great value on equality, and that we recognise an individual for their achievements rather than their faith or the colour of their skin. As public sector organisations begin measuring their progress towards gender equality and reporting it to me, we'll begin to build a more detailed picture to help create more equal and inclusive workplaces. This will have flow-on effects from the public sector into our private lives. It will help cement Victoria as a place where no one should miss out on an opportunity because of their gender or any other aspect of who they are. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I hope this opens up future conversations, and I encourage you to reach out to my office to arrange a meeting. I wish you all the best for the rest of the evening and the opportunities to meet face to face, to learn from one another, to celebrate diversity and to share a delicious meal. Thank you, and may you have a peaceful and happy Ramadan.